I spent over $200,000 raising my wife's kids. Now they say I'm not their real dad. I have believed all my life in fundamental principles. Working hard for what you want, taking responsibility for your own actions, and being loyal to the people you love. I learned the hard way that putting love in the wrong people can actually destroy everything we've built. The story I'm going to share is about how those values were tested and how everything I thought I knew about family crumbled before my eyes. It's not a happy story, I must warn you. It's about being exploited, used, and finally recognizing when it's time to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened because I believe it's important to be honest about these situations. We often hear about happy endings, but sometimes the ending is just an ending. And in some cases, this is necessary, even liberating. I'm not trying to present myself as some kind of hero in this story. I made mistakes, I was probably too trusting, I believed the best in people when I should have been more cautious. I ignored warning signs and paid the price for it. But I also learned a lot in this process. It all started with a woman named Rebecca. She was a widow, her husband, an executive at a large company, had died in a car accident. She had 2 young children, a boy named Kevin, around 5 years old, full of energy, and a girl named Sophia, who was just taking her first steps. I met this family through a mutual friend and could immediately tell that Rebecca was struggling. It wasn't just sadness, although it was certainly there. It was something deeper. She looked completely exhausted, with visible dark circles under her eyes, slow movements, like someone running on automatic. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that can be resolved with a good night's sleep. It was a deep exhaustion, the kind that penetrates to the bones, the result of carrying the weight of the world alone on your shoulders. I didn't get closer because I felt obligated or because of some savior complex. It was simply because I saw her, really saw her in her daily struggle. I saw her effort and wanted to help, make things a little easier for her and the children. I started offering little help. I stayed with the children so they could rest a little, I went shopping at the supermarket, that kind of thing. But it quickly evolved into something more significant. I found myself wanting to be a father figure to those children. Their father was gone and I felt I could fill that role. Not to replace you, of course, but to provide the love and support that every child deserves. I think I was contrasting my own values, hard work, responsibility, loyalty, with their situation. I wanted to give them what their father could no longer provide, not because I felt obligated, but because I genuinely wanted to do so. It felt right, like the beginning of something good, something true. And for a long time, it was really good. I dedicated myself completely to this new family. She worked long hours not only to pay the bills, but to make sure the children had everything they needed: good schools, nice clothes, a comfortable home, plentiful food. I made a point of prioritizing their needs above mine. I wasn't just trying to meet basic needs. I wanted to eliminate any sense of loss they might feel due to the absence of their biological father. I wanted to fill that void, make them feel safe and loved. But it wasn't just about material things. I was present emotionally too. I attended every school event, every football game, every theater performance. I was the one who applauded the loudest, their biggest fan. I organized birthday parties, planned family vacations, did all the things a father does. And they responded, or at least I thought they did. They loved me back, called me Dad, not Eric, but Dad. And you know what? I believed it, I really did. I felt like the luckiest man in the world. I was so caught up in the idea of this perfect family, so wanting it to be true, that I didn't notice the cracks that were beginning to form in the structure. I was so focused on building this ideal image that I ignored the warning signs. Looking back now, I can see that I was building on a foundation that wasn't as solid as I imagined. But at that moment, I was fully committed. I had invested my heart and soul into it. I was dedicated to making it work, to being the best father figure I could. I put everything I had into this family project, and for a while, it seemed to be working. We had our routines, our traditions, our inside jokes. We were a family. I was sure of it. And that feeling is what kept me moving forward, believing that everything would be okay in the end. A detail that no one expects. That feeling of belonging can be the sweetest of illusions. The first signs of trouble were small, almost insignificant. Occasional comments from the kids, a bit of sass, eye rolls here and there. Nothing too serious, nothing you wouldn't expect from growing children. I ignored these behaviors. I told myself it was just a typical teenage phase they were going through. I didn't want to see it as something deeper or worrying. I remember one time when Kevin, who was probably 13 or 14 at the time, made a sarcastic comment about how I wasn't cool because I wouldn't let him stay up late. Sophia, a few years younger, agreed with some equally disrespectful remark. That hurt a little, but I just laughed and let it go. I told myself they were just testing limits, like all teenagers do. That small pain in my chest that I felt should have been my first warning, but I chose to ignore it. As the children grew older, the disrespect became more evident. Kevin, upon turning 17, was a full-time rebellious teenager. He began ignoring established schedules, dismissing any advice I offered, and generally acting as if he had the right to do whatever he wanted. It was classic teenage rebellion, I suppose, but it felt different, sharper. There was a certain evil that I couldn't ignore. Sophia, who was around 14 years old during this period, began to imitate her brother's behavior. She would roll her eyes at me, ignore my instructions, and disregard any concerns I expressed. They formed a united front against me, making it clear that they didn't respect my authority or me, to be honest. It was as if they were ganging up on me, testing how far they could push me, how much I could take before I exploded. What made it even worse was Rebecca's reaction, or rather, her lack of reaction. She didn't intervene, she didn't support me, she just sat there, generally focused on her cell phone, pretending not to notice what was happening. Sometimes she even subtly sabotaged me. Maybe I pretended to be distracted by my phone or sighed as if I were the irrational one in the situation. It wasn't just a passive attitude, it was almost as if she was actively encouraging their behavior. She always made excuses, "Oh, they're just tired," or "It's just a phase," or "We need to keep the peace." There was always some justification, but what was really happening was a pattern of permissiveness towards disrespect. She was letting them behave this way, and in doing so, she was undermining my authority and making me feel increasingly isolated in the house I helped build. I began to feel like I was the only one who cared about setting limits, about teaching the difference between right and wrong. I was beginning to question Rebecca's intentions. Was she really that oblivious to what was going on, or was she deliberately sabotaging me? I had my first big wake-up call around this time, but I still didn't fully understand what was happening. The real break, the moment when everything began to fall apart, happened one night when Kevin arrived home much later than the agreed time. I'm talking hours of delay, no calling or texting, nothing. I was worried, of course, but when he finally showed up, he acted like it was no big deal. I asked calmly, I might add, where he had been. A simple question, seeking just a little responsibility. He didn't even look at me. I simply said, "Relax, I'm not a child anymore." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just an evasive and disrespectful response. And then he said something that stuck with me deeply, "You're not my real father. Stop acting like you boss me around." So, suddenly, all those years of love, care, and support were thrown in my face. It was like a punch in the stomach. Sophia, who was standing there, agreed, "Yeah, you're just a guy Mom married." As if all the years we spent together, all the memories we created, meant absolutely nothing. Something inside me just broke at that moment. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a deep disappointment. And worst of all, Rebecca didn't say a word. He just stood there, silent. His silence was the ultimate betrayal. It confirmed everything I was beginning to suspect, that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a provider, someone to take care of the things their real father could no longer do. It was the decisive moment, the moment I realized that the family I thought I had built was a lie. It didn't take long after that first incident for it to happen again. This time it was with Sophia. She had made a mess in the kitchen, and I asked her to clean it up. Simple, right? Basic responsibility. But instead of doing so, she just looked at me and said, "Why don't you do it? It's your house, isn't it?" That hurt. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was the way she said it, as if I were some kind of servant, as if my only purpose was to clean up after them. It highlighted my outsider status, reducing me to nothing more than a provider, a cleaner. It was a deliberate attempt to belittle me, to make me feel small and insignificant in my own home. And then Kevin, as if waiting for his cue, repeated the same line, You're not even our real father." It was as if they were taking turns attacking me, reinforcing their rejection, making sure I understood my place, or rather my lack of place, in their lives. But this time, it was Rebecca's reaction that really sealed the deal. She didn't scream, she didn't get angry. He just looked at me casually, without even looking up from his phone, and said, "They're right, Eric. Maybe you should take it easy." That was it. It was the moment I knew it was over. It was no longer just the disrespect of children. It was Rebecca's explicit agreement with them. She was siding with them against me, the person who had dedicated years of her life to caring for them. It wasn't a moment of anger or even hurt, not really. It was a moment of clarity. I finally understood. It was done. There was no turning back. This wasn't a family. It was a sham, and I was finally ready to call it quits and go on my way. So I did something I never thought I would do. I stopped. I stopped giving, I stopped caring, I stopped trying. It was not a sudden or impulsive decision. It was a deliberate and conscious choice. I simply withdrew. I stopped providing for them. No more rides, allowances, protection, advice, worry. I let them experience the consequences of their own actions. It was a complete change from how I had been for years. I was always there for them no matter what. Now I had disappeared emotionally. It hurt, I'm not going to lie. It went against all my instincts. I had invested so much of myself in that family, and it was incredibly painful to just walk away. But I knew it was necessary. I needed to protect myself. I had given my all and they threw it back in my face. I was tired of being the doormat in the house, the one who always gave in, always forgave, always pretended nothing happened. At first they laughed. They made fun of me, made sarcastic comments, and smiled disdainfully whenever I passed by. They thought they had won. They thought they didn't need me. They were counting on Rebecca, thinking she could provide everything I had. They were wrong. They teased me a little, imitating my instructions, mocking the way I used to set limits. They would say things like, "Oh, are we breaking the rules?" with an exaggerated emphasis, rolling their eyes and exchanging smiles with each other. It was as if they were trying to provoke me, to get a reaction. Rebecca, oh, she made sure to make up for my absence. He financed their little shopping trips, made sure their weekends were still filled with fast food and unnecessary spending. She kept them comfortable, kept them cocky, and kept feeding the idea that they didn't need me. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew Rebecca's resources were limited. She didn't have the kind of income one had. I wouldn't be able to maintain that level of spending forever. So I remained quiet. I let them have fun. I let them think they were doing well. I knew that the confrontation with reality was coming. I didn't get involved, I didn't argue, I didn't react. I just watched silently, waiting for the inevitable. It was a strange kind of patience, born of the certainty that I was right. I knew their arrogance was built on a shaky foundation, and I knew that foundation would eventually crumble. I just needed to wait. It was a waiting game, and I was willing to play until the end, even if it meant giving up everything I had achieved so far. And then, slowly but surely, things started to change. Shopping trips have become less frequent. Fast food outlets have become rarer. New clothes stopped appearing. Small changes at first, but noticeable to those who were paying attention. Then, bigger problems started to emerge. School fees have become a concern. Kevin got into some trouble at school, and Rebecca didn't know how to handle the situation. Sophia broke her phone, and there was no money to fix it. I remember the first morning Kevin missed the ride I used to give him to school. He always took her for granted, rarely bothered to say, "Thank you." Now he was on his own. He ended up having to run to catch the bus, and, from what I heard, he almost didn't make it, arriving panting and completely out of breath. It's a small thing, I know, but it was symbolic. It was the first real crack in their comfortable world. And I will admit, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not joy, not exactly, but a silent confirmation that he was right. I knew what it was like to fight, to have to work for everything you have. I remembered those days when I was young, having to struggle to survive. They, on the other hand, always had everything handed to them on a platter. I didn't say anything, of course. I just watched. I saw the frustration on Sophia's face when she realized her broken phone wasn't going to magically be replaced. I heard her complaining to Rebecca, and I heard Rebecca's increasingly flimsy excuses. She was starting to run out of money and starting to realize that she couldn't provide everything I had provided. That same day, Sophia had a complete meltdown, whining about how unfair it was that she couldn't fix her phone. Rebecca finally admitted, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, that she didn't have the money at that moment. It was a small admission, but a significant one. It was the first time she openly acknowledged the limitations of her resources. It was the beginning of the end of his denial. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. They were beginning to understand that their privileged lifestyle had depended on me, on the person they had so readily discarded and disrespected. The free ride was over, and they were finally starting to feel the bumps in the road. It was a harsh but necessary awakening. My absence was making itself felt. I didn't need to say a word, I didn't even need to make a gesture. I just had to step away and let reality do its work. It was like watching a house of cards gradually crumble, with each card revealing the fragility of the construction. Everything they had taken for granted was unraveling before their eyes, and I was just watching from afar, not intervening, just watching as they learned the hardest lesson of all, the consequences of their own choices. It didn't take long after the phone incident for Rebecca to finally confront me. She was angry, of course. He accused me of being childish, of neglecting my responsibilities. That word, responsibilities, stuck with me. It revealed how she really saw me, not as a partner, not as a father figure, but as someone who had obligations to fulfill. One provider, one walking ATM. She kept talking, blaming me for everything that was going wrong. He said I was abandoning them, that I was being selfish, that I wasn't acting like a man. Tried to make me feel guilty, make me feel like I was the bad guy. It was all projection, of course. She was projecting her own failures onto me. I let her vent. I let her get it all out, and then, when she finally stopped to breathe, I asked her a simple question. I asked her why she never stood up for me, why she always took the kid's side, even when they were being disrespectful. I asked her why she allowed them to treat me the way they did. And that's when it happened. That's when the truth finally came out. She sneered, and I mean a real sneer, and said, "Because I agree with them, Eric. You were never really their father." It was like a slap in the face, but it was also a confirmation of everything I had suspected. But she didn't stop there. It went further. In fact, he admitted that he had told the children not to let me control them. "I told them not to let you control them," she said. "I raised them myself before you, and I can do it again." That was the real blow. It wasn't just passive inaction, it was deliberate, long-term sabotage. She had actively encouraged their disrespect, poisoned their minds against me. Kevin and Sophia were in the hallway, watching everything, arms crossed, small arrogant smiles on their faces. It was as if they were enjoying the show. And at that moment I thought, this is it. This is who they really are. Not the sweet, innocent children I had tried to love and care for, but spoiled, entitled teenagers encouraged by their manipulative mother. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal, I felt a sense of relief. It was over. The farce was over. I had my answer. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had made the right decision in walking away. The truth was ugly, but also liberating. I was finally free. Free to follow my own path, free to find people who truly valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. That confrontation was the final point, the closure I needed to definitively turn the page. But things got worse before they got better. The children, fueled by Rebecca's anger and their own sense of entitlement, began to act out even more. It started with little things. My personal belongings disappeared. Then some of my important work files disappeared from my computer. I started to suspect that they were messing with me, but I didn't have any concrete proof. Then the situation escalated. One morning I found my car scratched, a long, deep scratch running down the entire side. That's when I knew I needed to do something more drastic. I discreetly installed security cameras in and around the house. I didn't tell anyone, not even Rebecca. I just wanted to gather evidence of what was happening, for my own protection and mental peace in the midst of the chaos that my life had become. And I got the evidence I needed. A few days later, I caught them in the act. Kevin and Sophia in my closet, laughing as they ripped my clothes apart with scissors. It was a deliberate act of vandalism, silent violence against everything I stood for. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or scream. I just kept calm. I documented everything. I saved the video footage. I took photos of the damage. I gathered every threatening text message they had sent me, all the evidence of their growing hostility. I was letting the game play out, allowing them to think they were winning, while secretly preparing for my exit. I knew I needed to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. I knew this was going to get ugly and I wanted to be prepared. I was building my case, gathering the ammunition I would need to defend myself if it came to that. It was a sad and pathetic situation, but he was determined to deal with it with as much dignity and composure as possible. I wouldn't lower myself to their level. It would be smart, strategic, and silent. The next step was to consult a lawyer. I explained the whole situation, showed all the evidence I had gathered. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, assured me that I had a solid case. We discussed divorce and he even suggested a restraining order, given the children's growing hostility. I also filed a police report about the property damage. It felt strange reporting my stepchildren to the police, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to create an official record of his behavior to protect myself from any future accusations or legal challenges. It was another step in the process of cutting ties, of freeing myself from this toxic situation. So one afternoon, while Rebecca and the kids were out, I packed my bags. I didn't take much, just the essentials, the things that really mattered to me. I left everything else behind: the furniture, the appliances, all the material possessions I had accumulated over the years. They weren't important. What mattered was my freedom, my peace of mind. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers, along with copies of all the supporting documents. The police report, photos of the damage, screenshots of the threatening text messages. It was a formal act of separation. There was no turning back. I left that house and didn't look back. I got into my car, the one with the long scratch on the side, and drove away. I didn't have a plan, not really. I just knew I needed to leave, escape the toxic environment I was living in. The final step was financial. I closed all joint accounts, removed Rebecca's access to my funds. It was a harsh measure, I know, but necessary. It had to cut off his ability to continue supporting the children's entitled behavior. It had to be made clear that the free train had stopped. It was the final cutting of ties, the last act of withdrawal. It was over. As expected, Rebecca was furious. She called me repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails, accusing me of being a coward, of abandoning them, of being a terrible person. She stated that she could manage without me, that she didn't need my money, that she would be better off without me. It was all idle talk, of course. She was in denial, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. I didn't answer your calls. I didn't respond to your messages. I just blocked your number. I refused to get involved in any further conflict. I had said my part. I had taken my stand, and it was over. I needed to focus on my own well-being, on building a new life for myself. Then the kids started sending me messages. At first, they were the same casual, arrogant types they had sent before. But gradually the tone changed. They began to look worried, even regretful. They apologized for their behavior, admitted that things were difficult, that they were struggling without my support. Finally, I received a message from Sophia. It was just 3 words: "I miss you." It was a significant change, but it was too late. The damage was done. Trust was broken. I couldn't go back even if I wanted to. I remained silent. I didn't respond. I acknowledged his regret, but remained firm in my decision. I had learned a painful lesson, and I would not repeat my mistakes. I had given my all, and they threw it back in my face. It was finished. My silence was my answer. It was my way of saying, "You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." It was difficult, but necessary. It was the clearest way to communicate that there was no going back. That chapter of my life was closed forever. The curious thing is that closure, as painful as it was, brought me a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely, without the constant pressure of trying to please people who would never truly value me. So, that's my story. It's not pretty, but it's real. And I learned some valuable lessons from her. The biggest one: never, ever allow people to take you for granted. Never beg for respect. Never waste your energy on people who don't value you. And when you're being used, when you're being disrespected, walk away. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. It's a hard lesson to learn, and it's even harder to put into practice, but it's essential for your own well-being, for your own self-respect. You deserve to be treated with kindness, with respect, with love. And if you're not getting that, you have the right, the obligation, to leave. Some people only realize your value when you're gone, and by then it's too late. It's a sad truth, but it's a truth without a doubt. Don't expect others to understand your value. Know your own worth and act accordingly. It's not about being selfish, but about being self-aware. It's about protecting your heart, your mind, and your soul from those who try to diminish you or use you only for what you can provide. Over the months that followed my departure, I went through a period of deep reflection. I questioned my choices, analyzed my mistakes, and, above all, tried to understand how I had allowed myself to stay in that situation for so long. I realized that part of me was so desperate for a family that I ignored the warning signs. He was willing to accept crumbs of affection because he thought it was better than nothing. What a mistake! It's better to be alone than in bad company, as the old saying goes. And he is absolutely correct. I started to rebuild my life step by step. I rented a small but comfortable apartment. I invested more time in my work and was soon promoted. I reconnected with old friends that I had neglected during my marriage. I started exercising regularly, something I had abandoned due to lack of time when I was always rushing to meet Rebecca's family's needs. I discovered that I had forgotten many things that gave me pleasure. Reading a good book, watching a football game without interruptions, traveling to places I always wanted to see. It was like I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece, day by day. Freedom tastes sweet when you finally find it after years of silent oppression. Occasionally, I still received messages from Kevin and Sophia. They became more sincere, more desperate. It seemed like they were finally understanding the impact of their actions. Rebecca also tried to get in touch a few times, but her messages fluctuated between anger and pleading, showing that she had not yet accepted her responsibility in the situation. I maintained my decision not to respond. Not out of cruelty or revenge, but because he knew that any interaction would only reopen wounds that were beginning to heal. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent response we can give. It makes it clear that certain lines, once crossed, cannot be redrawn. Certain words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. In the end, I realized that the real problem was never that they didn't accept me as a father. The problem was that I didn't value myself enough to demand basic respect. I was so focused on being the perfect father, the perfect husband, that I forgot to be a person with dignity and boundaries. This realization was transformative. I started setting healthy boundaries in all aspects of my life. I learned to say no when necessary, to express my needs clearly, and to be unapologetic about having reasonable expectations in relationships. It was as if I had discovered a new strength within me, a strength that had always been there, just waiting to be awakened. Pain can be a great teacher, if we are willing to listen to its lessons. Surprisingly, a year after I left, I received a letter from Kevin. He was about to start college and wrote a long letter of apology, reflecting on his behavior and expressing genuine regret. He explained that, for a long time, he blamed me for his father's death, as if by accepting me as his father he was betraying his memory. It was an immature perspective, but understandable for a traumatized child. He said that only after I left their lives could he see clearly how much I had done for them. Sophia also wrote a few weeks later expressing similar sentiments. His words were sincere, but they didn't change my decision. The damage was done. I responded to both of them with brief messages, wishing them the best but making it clear that our paths had parted permanently. As for Rebecca, I never saw her in person again. The divorce was finalized without us meeting, everything was resolved through lawyers. I learned from mutual friends that she was struggling financially, just as I had predicted. I felt no satisfaction from this, just a sad confirmation that the choices we make have consequences. She had built her life on the quicksand of dependence and entitlement, and when the tide rose, there was no solid foundation to sustain her reality. It was a difficult lesson for her, but a necessary one. Sometimes people only learn through difficulty. Sometimes the only way to grow is through pain. And we all grew, each in our own way, through this painful experience. Today, years later, I am a different person. Stronger, wiser, more aware of my own worth. I no longer let others define my importance or determine how I should be treated. I learned to differentiate between giving out of love and giving out of fear of losing someone. I learned that true love includes mutual respect, that family is more than blood or legal papers. It is a daily commitment to honor and value each other. This journey, as painful as it was, brought me to a place of peace and self-discovery that I never would have found if I had stayed in that toxic situation. Sometimes the end of a chapter is just what we need to start writing a better story.